Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader Reading Books for You. Today I will be reading Chapter 7 from The Moon and the Magic Box by Michael Ross, illustrated by Magdalena Adic. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 7 The Trouble with Alcohol. Pengy had been observing the antics of the humans on Earth for a long time, and indeed, he did know a lot about human habits, languages, cultures, etc. But there was so much more that he didn't know from a practical point of view. He had observed the effects on humans of many things, but had not experienced them. He was very clever, and with his inherent basic magical abilities was able to cope with most things that confronted him. At the same time, he was a voracious learner. His brain, well, he has two brains. The largest one is used for everyday life as an alien on the moon, and a much smaller one attached to the base of the larger brain, whose sole purpose it is to supply a whole plethora of magical spells, which are more powerful when combined with the powers of the magic wand he possessed. He could lift a glass of water with his mind, or an ability to concentrate on numerous tasks all at the same time. He could bring something back to life that had recently expired. He needed to work with the wand to perform this, and it took so much energy out of him. He would usually have to recuperate afterward for half an hour. He did have degrees of invisibility he could instill on himself, and to a certain extent, up to 3 others around him. But again, the energy it took would pretty well floor him, and he would need to recover for a while. And so it was that they were happily chatting about the experiences they had in the magic box. Poor Nesbit did appear to be the butt of the jokes. He sat there resigned to the fact that the next time Troy or Desme shouted out, "Here is a ball, Nezzy. Do you want to play fetch?" he might jump on them, pull them to the ground, and lick them all over their faces. Yeah, that would shut them up, thought Nesbit. In the middle of all this, there was a knocking coming from the front door, accompanied by various voices. Troy, Desme, Nesbit, and Pengy froze. Usually, Nesbit would have reacted to anything coming up the winding road to the farmhouse, be it lorry, car, and even people walking. But he had been so involved in all that was happening, he hadn't noticed anything. Again, there was more knocking, a little more urgently this time. Luckily, Troy and Desme had drawn the curtains looking into the living room. They could hear voices outside the living room wall, but not distinct enough to recognize them. Then they seemed to disappear as if moving away. It was quiet for a few moments. Then the knocking on the front door started in earnest again. Troy whispered urgently to Desme, "Look, I'm going to have to see who it is. They are not going to go away. Can you come with me? Desmi replied, Sure I can, but who is going to look after Pengy? Troy continued, Oh, I'm sure Pengy can look after himself for a minute or two. Troy then turned to Pengy and explained what they were going to do. Pengy, can you hear someone knocking at the door? We are going to have to check out who it is. So, in the meantime, I'm turning the TV on. I don't even know what you eat and drink, or even if you do at all. But see that door in the corner? Troy pointed to the corner of the room. If you go through there, you will see the refrigerator and cupboards to your left. Just help yourself to food, and we will try to be as quick as we can. And please, whatever you do, keep as quiet as possible. Pengy nodded, and a big, toothy grin appeared where his mouth should be. Yeah, no problemo. I'm so excited to see TV. He picked up the TV controller. I play with this to change programs, yeah? Yes, Troy replied. That's right. So they left Pengy sitting in his mom's armchair because he was so small his little legs couldn't reach the floor. But he was armed with the TV controller and the same big smile on his face. As they left the room, Troy turned to Desmi and remarked, What could go wrong? Desmi just shrugged her shoulders. As they left, they closed the door quietly behind them. They took a deep breath as Troy unlocked the door, grabbed the door handle, and swung the door open. On the doorstep were 3 of their friends from school. Slurpee, he had a habit of slurping drinks. Jello, his staple diet was jelly, any flavors, just lots of it. And Bragger, anything anyone could do, Bragger claimed he could do better. They all had BMX bikes, covered in mud and grime. Slurpee was very tall for his age, a good head taller than Troy, and dressed in hand-me-downs from his older brother, so none of his clothes matched. He had cropped hair and a couple of missing teeth. He looked like someone you wouldn't want to argue with. Jello, on the other hand, was quite plump and a lot shorter. His mom always dressed him, and you could tell. Everything he wore was a little old-fashioned and very clean. He loved his peaked cap, which he wore with the peak at the back. It sported the badge of his favorite football team, Manchester United, and was falling to pieces, but he wouldn't go anywhere without it. Finally, we have Bragger, the smallest of the trio. What he lacked in height, he made up for with a big mouth. He claimed he had done everything known to man. All his friends knew he hadn't, but just accepted it as friends always do. His clothes always looked like they were on their last legs and about to fall apart, and they always seemed to be the same things. His favorite t-shirt, jeans, and trainers. No one had seen him wearing anything different. He also had in-ear wireless phones, well, only one in his right ear. So he could listen to a conversation and listen to music at the same time. He was already the guitarist in a band with other friends. Now, Bragger was clever in the top set of all his subjects at school, but because of it, a bit of a nerd as well. Common sense did not come into his way of thinking, so he usually ended up being the butt of many of his friends' jokes. Having said that, they also respected him. He had helped all of his friends out at some stage with school projects and so on. So he was a valuable resource, and he knew that. So his friends always included him in any outings or get-togethers they had arranged. His dress code was very conservative, to say the least. It is almost as if he would only buy clothes from the nerd section in a store such as Walmart or Tesco. So, for a few moments, Troy and Desme stared silently at Slurpee, Jello, and Bragger. And they stared back. It was Troy who broke the silence with a tentative, "Hey guys, what's up?" Then they all started speaking at once. The trio was wondering where they had been, that it was school holidays, and what about all the great adventures they had planned during the last week of school before they broke up. Troy and Desme countered by saying they had to help a little on the farm, which the trio accepted. But very quickly they relaxed and chatted about all sorts of things, from football to BMX bikes, exploring the quarry 4 miles away and ignoring all the keep out signs that were planted everywhere. They were all getting along famously when suddenly there was the sound of a rock concert coming from the living room. But the noise was loud, deafening. There was the chinking of glasses on bottles, even some top of the voice singing in Pangy's bizarre Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. There was some pleading for help, howling by a dog coming from somewhere. Troy was convinced that it was Nesbit. It was at that point that Desme and Troy looked at each other and realized they had left Pangy on his own for a couple of minutes. That couple of minutes was now nearly 15 minutes. It was Bragger who looked at Troy and remarked, "Hey dude, what the hell is that? It seems to be coming from your living room. Who turned up the volume? It must be on full." And, of course, Troy knew suddenly it must be Pangy and immediately had regrets for leaving him on his own. They knew they had to get back to Pangy right away. It seems all hell was being let loose. So Troy and Desme did their best to try to put the trio off, who were already trying to inch their way inside and craning their necks towards the source of the noise. Troy came up with the idea he had an elderly relative staying who wasn't quite right in the head and was always getting up to mischief, so they had better go and sort him out. They all accepted this explanation, except Bragger, who narrowed his eyes, looked at Troy and Desme, said nothing but slowly shook his head from side to side, and finished it with a sly smile on his lips. Troy knew right away that excuse didn't fool Bragger, and very annoyingly to Troy. Bragger used two fingers to point to his own eyes and then used them to point to Troy's, meaning he was keeping his eye on Troy. Eventually, Troy and Desmi managed to send them on their way with promises that they would meet up in a couple of days. But it was Jello that blurted out, just before they cycled away. "Hey, you guys, what do you make of the military encampment up near Bramblewood?" "Bramblewood?" stammered Troy. "Yes, dude," continued Jello. "Haven't you seen them? There are soldiers everywhere. Haven't they visited you yet? It seems they have been to every other farm in the area." "What's it all about, do you think?" Troy replied, "Who knows, Jello? It is probably just maneuvers that they do every so often. They had called here one morning, but Mum—" "God, Bragger is annoying," remarked Troy to Desmi. "We will have to be careful about him. He will figure out what is happening before the others. Maybe we should let them in on our secret about Pengy. They could come in useful." Maybe, Troy," muttered Desmi. "Let's just see how things pan out over the next few days." Troy thought about this, and Desmi was right. Let's give it a couple of days. For now, though, Troy and Desmi rushed to the living room and opened the door slowly. They couldn't believe the mess that lay in front of them. It was as if a tornado had run through the room. There were papers and magazines all over the floor. Food of all sorts, from cracked eggs to cheese and chips, were strewn across the living room carpet. The TV was on, and the volume was full, and some archived footage of the rock band AC/DC playing at a concert. The volume was so loud it was making Troy and Desmi nauseous. Troy's sound system, linked up to the TV, was one of the best around, with massive speakers and a subwoofer which wouldn't have looked out of place in a concert hall. Troy found the TV controller on the floor near his feet, so he reached down and muted the volume. The silence that followed was deafening. Troy and Desmi's ears were ringing. There was a movement to one side of one of the sofas, and there was Pengy, sitting up just by swaying badly. Both eyes were out to the fullest extent on their stalks, but were waving around uncontrollably. He was covered in tomato sauce and dairy cream from an aerosol can. The empty sauce bottle and aerosol can was at his feet. He was giggling away with his chipmunk-style laughing. It looked like he was crying with laughter, but unlike humans, the tears were squirting out from just under the stalks that his eyes were in. Somehow he had found a box of cigars. Troy doesn't smoke, but his mother occasionally does. But these were a raffle prize she had won at a charity event some time ago. He had one lit, with a long drooping end of ash on the cigar that was threatening to fall on the floor at any moment. To one side of him was half a roast chicken that he must have ripped up and devoured. But worst of all, in the other hand, he had one of his mother's favorite cut crystal whiskey glasses. And by the side of him, there were some whiskey bottles that were lying on their sides, with the remnants of some alcohol left in some. The crystal glass was half full of the whiskey, and he was trying to drink it back in one go. But he missed his mouth completely, and it shot over his left shoulder. There was more chipmunk-like giggling. Troy and Desme hadn't said a word since they came into the living room. But now they crept around him and followed the trail of bits of food across the living room to the kitchen. Again, a disaster scene awaited them. There were broken bottles of milk, packets of open cornflakes, sausages, bacon, maple syrup, more broken and cracked eggs, all strewn across the floor. Desme just stood there, hand to mouth. How could one supposedly intelligent alien cause so much mess? Troy looked at his watch. 5:30 p.m. Right. He knew he had an hour and a half, at the most, to get everything back to normal before his mom arrived back. And this was not the way he wanted to tell her about Pengy, if at all. He stormed back into the living room to confront Pengy and find out what the hell he was playing at. Pengy was now on all fours and retching badly. What was coming up looked like chicken korma, but smelled like the contents of a baby's nappy. The smell was making Troy retch, so he tied a tea towel around his nose, grabbed one of Pengy's wrists, and started to drag him across the living room, through the kitchen, and to the back door. Just to the side of the back door was the old dog cage they got for Nesbit when he was a puppy, to keep him safe if they all had to pop out. In that short journey, Pengy was trying to talk to Troy. "Ah, so, hick, lovely human, und I think I drunky? Oh, mine head feel it want explode into little pieces, yeah?" As Troy was dragging him through the living room into the kitchen, they passed Desme, who was already helping to clean up. So Pengy continued, "Woo-hoo, Desi Bezzy, it is me, Pengy Wangy. Hick." At this point, Pengy's eyes and stalks were all over the place and wrapping themselves around each other. Pengy then shouted out, "Whoa, ein Minute, I can see 5 Demis. Why so many? Das ist very confusing für mich." Desme couldn't help but snigger a little at Pengy's antics and speech, but when she saw the look on Troy's face, she looked the other way. Once Troy had put Pengy in the dog cage, he blurted out, "So, what were you thinking? Do you realize the mess you have made?" Pengy struggled to control his swaying, and the eyes on his stalks, and whined at Troy. "Ah, me so sorry. I seen all these things from the moon, but never experienced effects. Now I know. It is like monster take over body, yeah? That dinky poo's so gut. But now I feel poorly, need to rest. After little rest, I use bit of my magic, make everythingy look goody again. So sorry, not want you be hangry with me, please." With that, Pengy's eyes closed, and he slowly slid onto the floor of the cage and appeared to be asleep. And then he started snoring. Troy couldn't believe it. Snoring? Not just gentle, soft snoring, a loud, rasping snoring. As Troy walked into the living room with a bucket of disinfectant and some old towels, Desmi looked up and with a quizzical look on her face said to him, "Troy, what is that noise? It sounds like someone is sawing some wood." Troy took a deep breath and remarked, "Believe it or not, that is Pengy snoring." At this, Desmi looked even more confused. Troy continued, "Well, at least I think I have figured out what happened. He has seen all these crazy things we humans get up to, but, of course, not experienced the effects they cause. Pengy must have drunk 2 or 3 bottles of whiskey. No wonder he is ill. I'm surprised he hadn't passed out. I bet he was fine before he started drinking, but when he did, it went rapidly downhill. I don't know how long he will be out, but he said he could use some magic to put everything right, even though I still think it's a good idea to make a start. Thanks for helping, Desmi." Desmi looked at Troy and smiled and replied, "Well, I'm just as much to blame, but I am sure it will be fine. We still have an hour before your mom arrives back. As always, she will text you when she is setting off, won't she? It will all be fine. Stop worrying." So they both set to it and had cleared up the majority of the food, shampooed the piece of carpet that was sodden with some whiskey, when all of a sudden they heard their names being called out from the kitchen. They ran in, and Pengy was looking as bright as a pin, standing up in the cage. His eyes were bright and steady. His eye stalks retracted. Another oversized smile on his lips, and he stated, "I'm back. All is good now. Feel hunky-dory. Oh, yes. Let me use little magic. Get everything back to normal, please." Troy and Desmi couldn't believe their eyes. What a transformation! Troy started to undo the cage door and then noticed Pengy walk to the side, through the bars of the cage, as if nothing was there. Troy thought to himself, "Must be magic." Pengy stopped, looked at Troy, and remarked, "Yeah, sure is, boss." He turned and hobbled slowly through the kitchen. His eyes came out on their stalks, and he was observing everything, when he saw something that needed repairing or clearing. Up, he said, "Ah, look!" He had removed the little wand he had stashed in a secret pouch around his tummy. Already it had integrated itself into his wrist, and when he saw something that needed cleaning or fixing, he simply pointed, and it was done. He pointed at the floor, and immediately it was looking cleaner than before. The box of cigars was filled up, and the box replaced where it had come from. The almost empty bottles of whiskey were now almost full, and in the drinks cabinet and so on. All the food had been replaced and back in the fridge, but not just say a whole roast chicken, a partially eaten one, which it was before Pengy got his hands on it. This entire process took less than 10 minutes. The timing was perfect because then Troy's mobile went off. It was his mom to say she would be home in 5 minutes. They bundled Pengy up and put him in the walk-in wardrobe in Troy's room. Pengy had already summoned the magic box and disappeared inside it, and then Desmi covered it with a dust sheet. Suddenly, Troy and Desmi could hear panting behind them, and there was Nesbit. So they got down and cuddled him. If only Nesbit could have talked, he would have told them that he could see things were going pear-shaped, especially when Pengy reached for the whiskey. When the volume of the rock group came over the powerful speakers in the living room, Nesbit couldn't stand the noise, so he made a bolt for the back door, sidestepping the mess already on the kitchen floor. From there he crept through a side door to the conservatory, and in that doorway could just hear Troy, Desmi, and their friends chatting away. So, out of sight, he kept to the wall and sneaked up the stairs without being spotted, and made his way into the peace and tranquility of Troy's bedroom and decided to wait. Troy's mom arrived back. "Hi, guys," she remarked. "Had a good day? What have you been up to?" Without fibbing at all, Troy just said that Slurpy, Jello, and Bragger had been around. "Oh, that's nice, love. It's good to have friends, isn't it?" At that, Glynis made her way into the living room as she stepped in. She stopped dead in her tracks and looked carefully around and whispered, "Oh my goodness! What a lovely surprise, you guys! You have spring cleaned the living room for me. I've never seen it looking so nice." Glynis's eyes started to well up a little with tears. She went over to Troy and then Desmi and hugged them both and said silently, "Thank you so much. You are both so thoughtful." Desmi and Troy just stood there and smiled nervously. Glynis started to walk towards the kitchen when again she stopped and looked down at the side of the sofa and spotted something lurking just underneath the side of the sofa. She kneeled and picked up a colorful small band of paper with a crest on the face side, and underneath it the words Havana, Cuba. She passed it to Troy and asked him what he thought it was. She couldn't read the words without dragging her glasses out of her bag, so Troy let on he had no idea and couldn't read what it said. "Oh, well," Glynis remarked, "it doesn't matter. It's only a bit of paper. Chuck it in the bin, love, please." And she was off. But Troy knew exactly what it was. It was a little paper band that surrounds a cigar, to tell the owner where they came from. And Havana, Cuba was famous for its cigars. When he was sure his mom was in the kitchen, he and Desmi sneaked a quick look in the box of cigars that was on the drinks cabinet, opened the lid, and sure enough, there was one cigar that had its band missing. So he slipped it on quickly, closed the cover, and went back to the middle of the living room. Glynis shrieked again. She came running into the living room and shouted with excitement, "You've cleaned the kitchen as well? I was coming home knowing I would have to mop the floor, and you have done it. Oh, I am the luckiest mom alive to have you two. I really am. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 8. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.